Alrighty. Well, hey, we'll just give this a couple of minutes, get things started. We'll go live. Here we go. I've actually figured out how to get it to go live on Instagram as well. We could do that straight from OBS now, which is kind of nice. So if you see me looking all over the place, it's because I've got 1, 2, 3 different chat windows to check out. So for those of you who do choose to watch live, we can maybe interact and have a chat on here while we read. So this is the Better Dad Show. I am the host for the Better Dad Show, Bill Hutchison. We're continuing to just read the book called Better Dads, Stronger Sons. We read the introduction and the first chapter, which was about authentic manhood. We read those already. If you did listen in or read along, there were some questions at the end of the last one. Just asking about if you're living a life of significance, areas of your life that you're struggling. What are you doing to actually resist passivity in your life? And then also just try to envision what the world would be like if you weren't in it. So yeah, that is what we talked about last time when we read about authentic manhood. The challenge that they had at the end was to ask your sons if you were in fact living a life of significance. And I did. And it was sobering, I guess you could say. I said, in the family, I'm living a life of significance, but my kids don't see it as outside of the home. So that I'd like to believe that doing this might, be something that'll leave significance beyond just my immediate family and the immediate home, as we as men try to endeavor to be better fathers, better dads, right? That's kind of what we're aiming for. So we will continue to read, and we will learn about what Rick Johnson says and some of the challenges with authentic fatherhood. Like I said last time, I'm quite amazed at the fact that this book was released almost 20 years ago. Makes me feel old. But it's still just a lot of the challenges that Rick brought up in the book is I think even more highlighted now than it was back then. So we will continue to read chapter 2, and we'll stop with some commentary during it. If you are in the chat and you want to pipe in as well, please feel free. Chapter 2, Authentic Fatherhood. It's much easier to become a father than to be one. Kent Nerber, Letters to My Son. Men, you are leaders of your families. You might be reluctant to assume that role. You might even deny that it falls to you. Nonetheless, you are your family's de facto leader, whether you choose to believe it or not. Leaders are always the highest priority targets in any war. The enemy knows that if he can kill the commander, the troops will be easier to defeat. Cut off the head and the body dies. The body in this case is your family. You are the head. One way to fight back and be the leaders that God created us to be is to be aware of our roles, our responsibilities, and our influence with those we lead. I probably should have started just with a reminder that the whole reason for this podcast is it's self-indulgent, because I do desire to become a better dad. But then also I'm hoping to get some people to sort of join in the journey as we become a better dads. So that's my motivation. That's one of the ways I'm trying to live a life of significance, which is the challenge, and something that I hope you guys want to join me with. So, the indispensable father. You may not think, this is actually a longer chapter. We've got 15 pages to read through. So we'll go a bit longer today, but it's all right. I think it's important. The indispensable father. You may not think of yourself as being particularly influential or even successful in life. Maybe you don't make a lot of money, lead a large group of people, save lives, or invent amazing gadgets. Maybe life has even beaten you down and you've lost confidence in your abilities. Consequently, you don't think of yourself as a big deal, but you can bet your boy does. He thinks you're a very big deal. He doesn't know or care what the outside world thinks. He only knows that between the walls of your home, you are about the biggest, wisest, most powerful person alive. Oh, he knows you're not perfect, but he doesn't care, because you're just good enough to be indispensable in his life. That might be true of my 13-year-old. I'm not sure if my 21-year-old would agree at this point. Fathering is at the heart of masculinity, of what it means to be a man. Godly fathers put others' needs before their own. If you're like me, you spend the majority of your conscious thought and effort on satisfying your own wants and needs. It's almost an automatic response to life. But if we are to be authentic men and fathers, we need to rethink that attitude and consciously make sacrifices so others can benefit and prosper. When fathers neglect their duty or are absent from the home, families are attacked by predators. Young men, such as gang members, who are raised without the influence of older men, often become marauding wolves themselves, predators preying on women and children for their own self-gratification. Families are like flocks of sheep. Children, like lambs, are naive and simple in their understanding of the world. Fathers are like sheepdogs, guarding the flock from marauding wolves. We protect our families from human predators and from corrupt television programs, movies, music, books, friends, and other people or influences that enter into our child's life. By the way, sheepdogs come from the wolf genus, so they are no strangers to wolves' traits and habits. Fitting, isn't it? We dads often find the hackles rising on our necks when we sense a wolf in sheep's clothing parading around our kids. I once told my teenage daughter, I might not always know why, but I know a wolf when I see one. I can sense him. Of course, my daughter says I think all boys are wolves. Yes. But I just tell her that's because I used to be one. It takes one to know one. When I was dating, I was, like all young men, deathly afraid of the fathers of the girls I went out with. If the majority of fathers showed any interest in meeting the boys their daughters were dating, I suspect that nearly all young men would be forced to remain celibate until marriage. It's a challenge for us, and I think another reason why it's so important for a dad and a mom to be involved in the lives of kids, right? Something about having a father in this situation that helps a lot. Where were we? The other day I stopped by an apartment complex to visit a young boy whose single mother had asked me to meet with him. As I pulled into the large complex, I noticed at least 35 or 40 kids playing in the parking lot. The kids were of all ages, from toddlers up to teenagers. Several of the older boys were wearing gang attire, aggressively posturing, smoking pot, and swearing loudly. A number of young ladies wearing suggestive clothing were hanging around them, trying to get their attention. Rap music was blaring from a speaker for all the kids to hear, no matter how young. The lyrics of the songs were so vulgar that they would have embarrassed the sailors on a Navy ship. They would have embarrassed the sailors on the Navy ship I was once stationed on. Yet these children played amongst this chaos as if it were a normal part of growing up. The only adults around were a few predatory men who skirted the perimeter of the action, looking for weakened prey. My first thought was, what chance do these children have of growing up to lead normal, productive, happy, and fulfilled lives? My second thought was, where are the adults? Where are all the men? When I spoke to the mother, I learned that no men were around because no men lived there, except the few I noted earlier scanning the flock for victims. I just entered the realm of fatherless America. Fatherless Australia too, that's for sure. I came by the apartment complex several weeks later on the weekend. Many children were out playing, but this time 4 or 5 visiting fathers were out interacting with and supervising them. This time, there were no predators lurking about, no gang attire, no drugs, no rap music, no half-naked girls, and no swearing. What a difference positive male influence makes. It was as if the sun had come out over the courtyard. Fathering is a modeled behavior that is becoming an increasingly rare commodity today. Because of the high divorce rate in our culture, we have a generation of fathers who grew up without fathers of their own. Men have become fathers without even having seen how a father acts and what his role entails. Before I became a Christian, I was concerned about my fathering skills. Not having had a very good role model growing up, I was not exactly sure of what to do in certain situations. I found myself reacting instead of having a proactive game plan. Reacting to situations often forced me to use anger instead of wisdom. Even after I started reading books to improve my fathering skills, I was not confident in my abilities. The books encouraged looking for teaching moments to use for lessons. I wasn't sure what a teaching moment was, much less what to say or do when it came along. Thus, I found myself evading or walking away from my responsibilities, thinking I was avoiding failure. I knew my children not only expected a better father, but they deserved one. And I knew my wife was watching and evaluating my role as a father. The prospect of losing her respect was more than I wished to endure. But by walking away from my responsibilities and trying to avoid failing actively, I was still failing. I was just failing passively, which was even worse. Many men I talk to have the same feeling of inadequacy regarding their fathering abilities. Without the proper training and role modeling, fathering can seem like an overwhelming responsibility. But as author Frank Pittman says, the guys who fear becoming fathers don't understand that fathering is not something perfect men do, but something that perfects men. The end product of child raising is not the child, but the parent. That is so true. I think as a father, it's hard for us not to want to become a better version of ourselves, better person, better husband, better father, better member of the community because we have our kids. It's a challenge sometimes. Let me say this. You are the man God chose to be the father of your children. God could have picked anyone on earth for this task, but in his infinite wisdom, he chose you. Even if you don't have confidence in your fathering skills, God says you fit the bill perfectly for his plan for your family. He knows all your strengths and weaknesses, and he determined before time began that you would be the father of your children. That's a challenge sometimes when you really doubt yourself as a father, but you are the dad that God made you to be. No, you're the dad that God chose for your children. And we need to remember that because that'll give us the strength when we really have no idea what we're doing. So does that make you feel better? Or just more terrified? Relax. If you're reading this book, you're seeking knowledge and wisdom on how to become a better dad. That speaks well of your heart. If you are sincere and persevere, God will honor that worthy desire by working in your life to grant you that wish. I prayed many times to my Heavenly Father for wisdom in raising my children, and I began to feel as though he had started honoring my request. Slowly but surely, I found myself recognizing teaching moments when they occurred. And by God's grace, he spoke through my mouth on many of those occasions, surprising even me with the wisdom that popped out. Once I began living a life of intentional fathering instead of just reacting to what life threw at me, God began blessing my efforts. Today, I love being a father. For years, I dreaded the thoughts of parenting teenagers. Now, however, I find the challenges of raising teenagers to be exhilarating. Even though these years are typically the most unsatisfying for a father. The natural curiosity teens have about life, the hormonal highs and lows, launching them into the world as productive, happy adults. Believe it or not, I find all these things to be fun, though challenging, and I find great satisfaction when God gives me the wisdom to address those needs. He can give you the same fulfillment in your family. Keeping a good attitude is half the battle. Believe me when I say I know how tough it is to be a man and a father today. You feel like you give and work and struggle, and there's never enough of you to go around. The pressures are unrelenting, and yet you are so important that you are nearly irreplaceable in the lives of your children, especially your son. Fatherhood is a privilege given by God, and with that privilege comes the power to impact lives. Exercise responsibility for good. That power can lead to God's blessing on you and your family. Privilege, power, responsibility, sacrifice. They're all part of that same package. They all belong to a father. Be a man. Stand tall. Give your son an example of masculinity that will survive down through the generations. I've heard men speak in reverent tones of their grandfathers or even great-grandfathers that they've never met. The power of the masculine legacy they left behind has cured and hardened down through the ages like a concrete foundation of manliness. The power of fathers. The father receives his power from God and from his own father. Alice Miller, For Your Own Good. Are fathers really all that important? Dr. James Dobson believes that our very survival as a people will depend on the presence or absence of masculine leadership in millions of homes across the country. sometimes I wonder if some of the challenges and stuff that we're seeing in society right now are because of that lack of masculine leadership. Something to think about. But being a good father isn't about what kind of parent you are, as much as it is about what kind of person you are. What kind of character do you have? How do you approach life and your responsibility as a father? Fathers have an innate ability to influence their children and the community around them. I call it father power. In my workshops for men, it's not the physical power of being bigger and stronger that their wives and kids, but the generational power with which God has endowed them. The power that allows fathers to affect people's lives positively or negatively, for good or evil, for hundreds of years. A father will impact people he doesn't even know and will never meet. Stu Weber says, "The great river of fathering that leaped from the primordial mist of Eden rolls through time and into eternity. How will you bend the course of the tributary that flows in your family? You will affect it, Whether you work at it with your heart and soul, or close your eyes and ears and put your hands in your pockets and pretend it doesn't exist. You will channel that river in one direction or another. That's the nature of fathering. You can't hide from its potency and power. Whether you like it or not, whether you accept it or not, whether you believe it or not, your influence will span generations long after you've left this earth." The Bible tells us that curses will go down, I think it's 7 generations, and the blessings up 3 generations. And we need to remember that and always look forward to that. Always keep that in mind, as we parent and as we talk and do anything, really. Like I said earlier, just being people, much less parents. For instance, if a man sexually molests or abuses his son or daughter, the abuse will adversely affect that child's whole life. In all likelihood, it will affect that child's children's lives as he or she exhibits the same abusive behavior. And so on it goes throughout the generations until someone courageously breaks the cycle of pain and finds healing. Conversely, men who father intentionally and put their children's needs ahead of their own start a legacy that snowballs with positive ramifications down through the centuries. I know one woman whose lineage has been fraught with fatherlessness since her great-grandmother's time. As a result, each successive generation of young mothers has themselves become unwed teenage mothers. The legacy is passed on from generation to generation of daughters. These women's desperate search for masculine love and affection causes them to make choices that confuse sex with love. So what is this power that fathers seem to possess, yet are clueless about or unwilling to acknowledge? I know of no man or woman, regardless of age, who doesn't still yearn for his or her father's approval and love. I met 75 and 80-year-old men and women whose only regret in life is that they never heard their father say, "I love you," or "I'm proud of you." That is a huge power. Stu Weber states it this way: there are 2 ways to recognize power. One is to see it at work. The other way is to measure what happens when it is gone. Either way, Dad is pretty potent. Present or absent, positive or negative, the power of a father is incredible. There isn't much of anything in life children can face that Dad's strong hand wrapped tightly around theirs. That's one thing I've been thinking of as we parent. We're not really going to know how good of a parent we've been for probably 20 years after our kids moved out, because I think I feel like what's going to really show me how well I parent is to see how well my children parent, or if they choose to be parents. I think that's something that, as we see the impact that we have on their lives, it's kind of like, what are we modeling and what do we want to see then flow into their future life? So how will they treat their spouse? How will they parent? I think that'll really show us, how we've parented. Another power that God has endowed on us is the power to create life. No man should plant a seed in a woman, impregnating her, if he is not willing to accept lifelong responsibility for the child he created. With the power to create comes accountability. God holds you responsible and accountable for the welfare of your family. Maturity in a man begins not with age, but with the acceptance of that responsibility. As fathers, we have the power to impact generations of lives. Make sure your impact on the 21st century is a positive one. Spiritual leaders. The great doers of history have always been men of faith. Edwin Hubble Chapin. I once heard a man who went into his daughter's room and prayed over her every night after she fell asleep. She grew up and left for college. The following Christmas, she came home for a visit. Talking to her mother one afternoon, she said, "Daddy still prays for me every night, even though I'm away in college, doesn't he?" "How in the world did you know that?" her mother replied. The daughter replied with confidence, "I can still see his knee marks on the carpet next to my old bed." Were you blessed to have a father who prayed faithfully for you when you were growing up? Only a small percentage of men, I ask, answer yes. How do you think your life might have been different if you had had a father who did that? Try this experiment. Go into your kid's room at night, kneel down, lay hands on their heads or backs, and petition God's blessings upon them. You'll find it a powerful moment. Your kids will stay very still under the blankets because, big or small, they recognize the significance of that act. My 2 older kids go to bed later than me now, so it's a bit harder to do that, isn't it? Pastor also once told me to pray not only for my own children's purity, but for their future spouse's purity as well. And he said to pray for the future spouse's parents, that they would have wisdom to raise their children within God's laws. I've never forgotten that advice. When your children know you are praying for them, for their sexual purity, for the purity of their future spouse, this knowledge gives them a guidepost to hang on. It also provides a form of accountability more powerful than bare parental authority. The purpose of drawing close to God is not only to discern our destiny, but also to lead our family and those closest to us to salvation. Part of our role as leaders of our families is to be spiritual mentors for our wives and children. It's a responsibility I felt least adequate to fulfill when I accepted Christ into my life. But God is more interested in what you can become than in what you are now. Interestingly, I found that my wife and children willingly follow my lead into spiritual growth, no matter how pathetic my effort as a teacher and guide. That is definitely an area I continually fall short with my own family, as frustrating as it is. Earlier this year, I tried to start with us just sharing a time of communion as a family, and I don't think I've done it for 3 weeks now, 4 weeks. But it's something I need to be doing more and leading the family in that way. So I felt like that sort of helped bring our family together a bit, gave us a chance to pray with one another and for one another. And it's just, it's definitely one I have fallen short on. I enter the year with good plans, but yeah. By next week, I'll have done it. Okay? Now, please understand that I was not a wise, mature Christian. I was a baby Christian in every sense of the word. The fact that she follows me speaks not only of her character, but also to the importance women place on men becoming spiritual leaders in their homes. I've heard it said that the number one complaint of women in the church is their husband's spiritual apathy. Pastor Jan Hettiga once said, the number one problem in the church is the explosive combination of masculine apathy and feminine discontent. I submit to you that masculine apathy is the cause of feminine discontent. This apathy and lack of involvement is a problem for men, not only in church, but also in the home. It's an all-pervasive trend that we must break. It's always interesting, too, to remember that this book was really written before social media. So I think there's extra pressures, too, on the family from outside their homes with expectations, because, you always see someone's best on Facebook or Instagram, even though they're not always living their best, and neither are we. So I reckon that would also probably lead to the apathy. As men, we can get distracted. And what was the other one? The feminine discontent. Because, the grass can always appear greener. Fathers also play a significant role in passing on a spiritual foundation to their children, especially sons. When only mom takes her son to church while they're growing up, approximately 15% of boys remain churchgoers after they become adults. However, if a dad takes an active role with mom in leading the family to church, the number who continue their spiritual journey increases to somewhere near 75%. That is a significant difference that speaks to the power men have to be spiritual influences upon their sons. Many men are reluctant or even scared to lead their family spiritually. Yeah, I harbored many doubts early on. What do I know about theology? I'm not worthy of such a huge task that has eternal consequences. What if I mess up? I was so scared that I was searching for ways to evade this responsibility. In the summer of 1998, at the age of 12, my son asked me to take him down on the field during a Promise Keepers event so he could accept the Lord. I tried making excuses why we shouldn't go, but Frank wouldn't accept my foot dragging. When we finally approached one of the volunteers, he said to me, "Why don't you lead your son to the Lord?" Gulp, I said. What do I say? After much stumbling around, I managed to murmur enough of a prayer to help Frank accept Christ into his heart. Since then, I've been blessed to watch his spiritual growth as a Christian, and someday I'll see him as a mighty man of God. I was subsequently blessed to baptize my wife and both our children, a truly humbling and awesome experience. God honored my feeble attempts at spiritual leadership by giving me these blessings. Watch and see what blessings he has stored up for you. Grab the helm and lead your family spiritually. God and fathers. Finally, what does God say about fathers? God could have had any role he wanted, but he chose to be our heavenly Father. He could have called himself any name he wanted. In several passages in the New Testament, Jesus prays to God, calling him Abba, and urges others to do so as well. Abba, literally translated, means daddy. It was the term of endearment used by a young child. Think of the implications behind that. Quite frankly, it scares me to think that I have been bestowed with a title that God claimed for himself. We had several newborn babies in our church congregation. I love to watch the fathers hold their babies and interact with them face to face. It is a good allegory of our relationship with God. Here is a totally defenseless little human, completely at the mercy of a great being, dependent upon him for survival. The baby simply sits and basks in the love being showered upon him by his daddy. The infant cannot yet understand the bigger picture of life, but he comprehends with full clarity the nonverbal message of love he receives from his powerful figure. Besides the fact that God calls himself Father, in what other ways are fathers connected with God? The Bible is God's way of truthfully speaking to us. According to my keyword search, the term father is used 1,488 times in the NIV Bible. Do you think God was trying to tell us that he considers fathering to be important? Jesus had ultimate authority on earth derived from God the Father. God has granted men power as leaders in the family. But with that power comes responsibility, the responsibility to learn about and use that influence for blessing our families. Unfortunately, many men today have abused that responsibility and thrown away that authority. Yes, I understand that some men do not deserve the mantle of family leadership, but society's attack on fathers is not the answer. As C.S. Lewis said, to banish the knight does not alleviate the suffering of the peasant. I don't think it's coincidence that the last words God spoke to his people at the end of the Old Testament, his last words of 400 years, were on the importance of fathering. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. Malachi 4, verse 6. God could have used any sign of societal revival to fulfill that prophecy. He could have said when people return to church, or when there is no more hunger or war. But he chose to highlight the restoration of fathers to their children in connection with the return of the Lord. The Hebrew word for curse in this verse is one of the harshest in Scripture, suggesting complete annihilation. That means only when men stop abdicating their God-mandated role as leaders in their families and communities will we be able to survive and thrive as a nation once again and not risk complete annihilation. Here's the good news, though. God has a plan for you as a father and as a man. God chose you to lead your sons, to make him a noble man. He didn't choose you and then leave you on your own to fail. Trust that God will help you if you seek his wisdom and discernment. Kindle that hope in your heart that God will work through you if you allow him to. Then stand back and enjoy the results. God's blessings for the journey. In those early days, I didn't know what I was doing half the time. Still there. But I blundered ahead anyways, praying the whole way and hoping God would turn my efforts into something eternal. And he did. He blessed me because I took action. I did not let my fear paralyze me. Just consider the ways that he has blessed me. I went from being unhappy, stressed, uncomfortable around people in many situations, confused, hopeless, scared, and miserable with life, to having a wife who not only loves me, but respects and admires me. She actually tells me she admires me. How cool is that? That has improved every aspect of our relationship, and I do mean every aspect. When it comes to marriage, my only model growing up was a failure. I've now been married 24 years. That's not possible except through the grace of God. I went from having almost no fathering skills, again I was programmed to fail, to having kids who respect me and believe that I have at least a little wisdom, on even-numbered days of the month anyhow. God took me out of my virtual isolation and gave me rich, full friendships with dozens of men. I even had men regularly seeking my guidance. I'm amazed at the way people often go out of their way to help me. I believe these relationships are God's blessings to my commitment to living in authenticity. My family and I now have hope instead of despair. My wife and kids are following in my footsteps, and I expect them to pass on a positive legacy for generations to come. Remember how I said in my introduction to this book that God did not answer my prayers to stop the fighting and screaming and hitting then? Well, he has answered those prayers now. None of that takes place in my home, though, only through God's grace, because I had such a bad model set for me. And one of the most gratifying blessings that God has bestowed on me, sometimes men and women come up to me after they've attended my seminars and share tearfully that God has spoke through me and helped change their lives and the lives of their families for the better. I can't tell you what that feels like, except that it has to be a tiny glimpse of heaven. It fills my heart to bursting. I enjoy all these blessings because I overcame my initial fear and reluctance to try something that made me uncomfortable. I swallowed hard and chose to be a better husband and father and a godly man, a man who seeks God's strengths to live a life of significance, helping others by sharing God's grace in a non-threatening manner. God used my pitiful efforts for great good. He has since used my mustard seed of faith to accomplish more than I will probably ever know. Be a bold, authentic dad and step out in faith. God is anxious to use you and your sons mightily. A lot of challenging stuff in there. I mean, again, it's emphasizing the importance of us as fathers, right? But then also just, but also then stepping in and assuring us that he will provide us with the wisdom, the grace, the mercy that we need and that he says we need and that we will need because we have kids. And kids are people, and people can be challenging. So at the end of the last chapter, there were some questions, and at the end of this chapter, there's also some questions. So they are, in what ways has God endowed you with power as a man and father to impact other people's lives? Second question, in what ways are you fulfilling your role as a spiritual mentor to your wife and children? In what areas do you feel you could improve? If you had enough courage to answer this question, discuss this question with your wife. Oh, that's a challenging one, isn't it? I think I said earlier on, one of the things I need to do is get back to, as a family, doing communion. But yeah, I'll talk about that one with my wife and see what she comes back with, and I'll see if it's okay to share. Third way, think about what your father was like. Talk to your son about a relationship with your father when you were growing up. If you did not have a father, tell your son about the things you miss by not having a dad. The last one, talk to your son about the responsibilities of fathers. Talk about the rewards that come when a father fulfills his God-given role and the consequences when he doesn't. So that's the second chapter of Better Dads, Stronger Sons. So I do hope that you're following along with it, whether you picked up a book yourself or you just listen to it when we read. I'm hoping you're following along. I have queued up someone else to join us for a chapter later on so that it won't just be me reading, it'll be me reading, but then discussing it live as we go along. So hopefully that just, we'll change it up a bit and just make it a bit more interactive. So just as we close this out, I do want to again say that this is a value for value podcast. And so what that means is that, if you find value in it, share. It'd be great if you shared it. Subscribe over on YouTube. You can like the Facebook page, follow me on Instagram. I try to go live on all those locations so that you can tune in and chat while we go. I haven't had any live chatters yet, but we might in a future episode. Probably help if I didn't do it at 1:30 a.m. in the morning here in Adelaide, but that's all right. But yeah, if you find it valuable, head over to, you can also go to betterdadshow.com. You can send me a message there. You can also find a link to the book. If you don't already have a copy of the book, you can download it, or you can, I think it's a link to Amazon that I have set up there. So you can pick up the book, a physical copy, an electronic copy, or an audiobook and follow along. So thank you very much. It's, like I said, it's a bit late tonight, so we'll end it there. And next week, we'll be going on to the next chapter, which is coming to terms with the past. So once again, I'm sure we'll be challenged. I would really recommend you just have a think of those questions from this week. So in what ways has God empowered you with the power as a man? What ways are you fulfilling your role as a spiritual leaders, and how you can improve? And then if you're brave enough, ask your wife. Think about what your father was like, and then talk to your son about that, your relationship you had with your dad. And also talk to your sons about the responsibilities of a father. So thank you very much for tuning in, for listening, or downloading this. And we will catch you again next week.